Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Harvey at Tejon Ranch Conservancy. Today, we are going to do lesson 9 in our nature journaling series. So let's get started. Lesson 9 is called Species Account. In this lesson, you're going to choose one species that you can readily observe, and you're going to document as many details as you can about that one species through a technique called direct observation. This is a focused species study. That means you're going to be looking at one plant or animal and learning as much as you can about it. Now, while you're looking at that one plant or animal, you need to remember that everything in nature is interrelated. Therefore, there will be some interaction with that animal or plant's environment, and those interactions will also be observed and recorded in your study. A species account is a common approach to cataloging organisms and building a database of information for scientists. In a species account, the observer attempts to learn as much as they can about that type of organism using words, pictures, and numbers to record the details about the structures, the functions, the behaviors, the location in, and the interaction with the surrounding environment. Any plant or animal can be observed for a sustained period of time, and that can be used as a species account. If you think that an animal that you're interested in might scamper away, it would be better to use lesson 8, animal encounters, instead. So don't choose an animal that's going to wander away before you're finished studying it. That said, you may find an animal that's slow moving or sticking around in one area. That animal, while it's moving, still can be studied. And in fact, it's very interesting because those movements are part of its behavior. In choosing that organism, keep in mind that plants are cooperative, so they won't walk away. But that said, an animal is fun because it exhibits behaviors that can also be recorded. Choosing an animal that won't crawl or fly away halfway through the observation period is really important. Catching small insects in clear plastic cups is a way to deal with moving animals. However, captive animals, while easier to observe, will display different unnatural kinds of behaviors, and they won't have that same structural setup as an animal who is in the wild. So, for example, studying your pet dog is not going to be a good thing to study. We want to look at wild things. The procedure you're going to use: record as many observations and questions about the species as you can using words, pictures, and numbers. Because you're going to be doing a lot of that, you want to make sure that you're using 2 pages in your journal, not just one. Include information about how that organism looks, its behaviors, and the feeding habits if you're talking about an animal, where it was found, everything. Focus on specific observations, not on explanations. If you are asking why something might be behaving a certain way, you can hypothesize and say, could it be? But while you're doing observations, you just want to talk about those observations and not explain them. Be careful. Don't anthropomorphize. That's a great word. What it means is attributing human characteristics or behaviors to animals. We do it all the time with our pets. Sometimes when we observe a wild animal, we'll often put an emotion involved in it. Don't do that. Think like a scientist. Don't make any conclusions based on your feelings or your emotions. Just record what you see and what you hear. How do you record those observations? Your goal is to describe the species that you're studying in as much detail as possible. using words, pictures, and numbers. That's those ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, and the pictures. You've been doing this. You're an expert at this now. So this won't be a problem. You need to record as many details in your observations as you can. Because we're talking about using lots of details, you want to have a lot of writing space. Also, consider that you may want to do one drawing, but you may want to do several drawings like you did in lesson 8. Be specific about your observations and your language. Don't just say the leaf is green. Rather, give it lots of detail. It's a deep blue green at the base, shading to yellow green within 2 millimeters of the edges. Notice, by the way, this is an ABC and a 1, 2, 3 because right here, 2 millimeters is a measurement. It's important to come up with an accurate description of your organism. Focus on making observations such as there are yellow leaves at the ends of the branches, and don't make assumptions like the leaves at the end of the branches are dying. That's not the same thing. Here are some examples of some of the things that you might want to observe. The subject's location. Nearby organisms. Is it sharing a space with other animals? Or what other things are living around a particular plant? The behavior of an animal, the similarities or differences compared to nearby individuals of that same species. Evidence of where else that organism has been, or maybe where it's going. Feeding behavior, soil, weather conditions, associated species, even a small map showing the area of study. These are just examples of things that you can do. There's lots more you can do. And remember, when you're journaling, this is your original work. And so you want to put some of yourself into this. Ask lots of questions. Put a question mark somewhere on your journal page and then make a list of those questions that you come up with. So you don't have to keep writing, I wonder this, I wonder that. Just put a question mark and list those questions. Remember though, every time you ask a question, you want to include a few hypotheses about what the possible reasons for something are. And that starts with the words, could it be? It's not your answer, it's your best guesses of the possible reasons for what you're observing. Remember, plan your journal page. You start with your metadata, the day, the date, the time, the season, location, habitat, the weather, temperature, wind speed, and cloud cover. Anything else that helps you to remember what it is you were looking at and what you were doing and how it felt to be there when you look back on this. This is a journal, so you want to be able to remember. The title is called Species Account, and then identify what it is that you're studying. It may be that while you're studying it, you haven't yet identified it, and that's fine. Leave space to add that later when you do some additional research. Remember that you're going to add your ABCs, and your ABCs include I notice, I wonder, also could it be when you're doing I wonder, and this reminds me of. You're going to include your metrics. Those are numbers of populations. Maybe you're studying a beetle, but there's several beetles there. Count them and see how many are living together. Any kinds of measurements, dimensions, weight, elevation, length, width, whatever. And then some kind of a drawing, sketch, or diagram. And if it's a diagram, remember you want to label it. Decide where you're going to put your drawings and your narrative on the page. So here I've brought up a previous journal entry that I had planned out. So I've got my metadata at the top, I've got my title, and then I created boxes, and these boxes are where I'm putting my drawing, leaving lots and lots of space for research and narrative. You don't have to do it that way, but it's one way to do it. Just make sure that you've planned ahead. So here's a couple of journal samples that might be helpful to you to see that other students have done in the past. So in this particular case, this student, Jade, who's age 13, was studying this really cool pitcher plant. So Jade drew a picture of the pitcher plant, wrote several questions, wrote lots of diagrams. Let's take a look at what we have here. Writing a title and adding metadata, the date and the location help to establish the big picture where you found this. Direct observation inspires related questions. So here's some questions because of all the observations. Hey, what's going on here? What is it I'm looking at? Why does it look this way? There's lots of writing and drawing and numbers and used together throughout the entire journal entry. Here's I notice, I wonder, and this reminds me of. And by the way, you don't see I notice, I wonder, this reminds me of. Look at this reminds me of, grows like corn lilies. Doesn't say it reminds this person of that, but this is a it reminds me of. So if you don't want to write I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, that's fine. But don't forget to use I notice, I wonder, and this reminds me of. Here's another student's journal entry. Again, at the top, here's the metadata. Then here's something really cool. This student is studying a bird, and it actually did a bird wing beat pattern. Looking at the bird, these little icons are the bird as it's flying up to this tree. And it's showing 2 wing beats, 2 wing beats, 2 wing beats. Very smart stuff to do. Talked about foraging behavior, how it's eating, how it flicks its tail. It also shows the different animals that are around it, and it puts numbers by them. So when you see these different lists, you'll see these little tack marks, and each one represents one of that particular species. And then here at the bottom, look at this. It's a map showing 4 different trees, and these are arrows showing where it flew to from here and then flew out this way. So this is a really informative map showing more about the behavior of that bird. And right here, there is some idea of what that bird sounds like. In our next lesson, we're going to be studying and trying to record the sounds that animals are making. So this is another thing that this particular student included in their journal entry. It's a lot of good information here. Once you've finished doing your journaling, I want you to go back home and look on your computer or in a field guide and see what other information you can find. Now, maybe you're still looking to identify what is that animal. That's perfectly fine. But remember that you want to see what other scientists already know about that animal. You would like to confirm that what you're observing is the same thing. Field guides, research papers, or websites. And remember, you want to be picky about the websites that you are using. So you want to make sure that perhaps the web addresses end in .edu or .org. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the very, very best information, but there's a good likelihood it's going to be good quality information. So finding these web addresses is fine. But once you do, you still have the responsibility to evaluate the information you're getting. And that means sometimes you may want to look at 2 or 3 different sources to confirm that same information, especially if it seems a little strange. Then don't forget, cite your sources. Where did you find that additional information? All right, so now we're going to talk about the reflection. Here's a review of everything you already know about writing a scientific paragraph. You're going to start by answering the questions that I give you in question-answer form. And that means you're writing as many words from the question into your answer. Number the answers in the order that you want to put them in a paragraph so that it flows. You don't want them jumping all around. You want each one of those sentences to lead to the next sentence and the next sentence and so on. So number them in the order you want them to go. Then begin your paragraph with a general sentence, something that introduces your topic. For example, you could say something as simple as, in this journal exercise, I observed and studied and then use your animal or your plant. In this case, I just wrote in northern flicker, which is a bird. Then you write the answers to your questions after you've done your topic sentence, putting them in the order you want them in, and then finish your paragraph with a concluding sentence. Again, nothing that's difficult to think about, just something that closes off that sentence. And I wrote, by using direct observation skills, I learned a lot about the northern flicker. So once you've done that, don't forget to proofread. Here are your questions. How did recording your observations in your journal help you learn? What patterns did you observe? And what are some of the possible explanations for one of the patterns that you observed? How might the interaction that you observed be affected by the time of day, the year, the weather, or locations? In other words, you're taking a moment at a time, but could it be different in different times of the year? What are some of the structures that you noticed while studying this species? And what do you think are those functions of those structures? And the last question, how do the organisms you studied and the other organisms in the area affect each other? So those are the thoughtful reflection questions that you want to use in order to wrap up this particular study, that now you're an expert on this particular organism. And that's it for this lesson. I hope you enjoy it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.